When my daughter Emma told me to find somewhere else to die, I didn't argue. Her words sliced through me sharper than any knife could. I stood there, suitcase half zipped, realizing this wasn't a fight I could win with logic or love. The house I built, the walls that had heard her first cries, her laughter, and our long talks at midnight had become a battlefield I no longer belonged to. Emma had just inherited $33 million from her father's estate. She stood at the doorway, her face cold and composed like she was evicting a stranger. "You'll be fine, Mum. You've had your time." That's all she said before turning away. I didn't cry in front of her. I folded my clothes carefully like a soldier preparing for exile and walked out without looking back. My whole life, 43 years of marriage, motherhood, and service, fit into two worn-out suitcases. There's a specific kind of silence that only a parent knows, the one that fills the air when your child decides you no longer matter. I carried that silence with me as I stepped into the cold night, unsure where I was going, but certain that this was the moment everything changed. People always imagine betrayal comes from enemies, but the truth is, it usually comes from someone you once prayed for. For 40 years, my life revolved around one thing keeping our family together. I was the wife who remembered every anniversary, the mother who never missed a school play, the woman who made sure everyone else's world ran smoothly. Richard, my husband, built a career that demanded attention, and I built the quiet structure that allowed it to exist. I cooked balanced bills, smiled through dinner parties, and kept peace even when exhaustion felt permanent. When Richard passed away, it felt like someone had turned off the gravity. The house became too quiet, too heavy. I thought Emma, my only child, would come home to comfort me. And she did at first. She arrived with her husband Ryan, both dressed in somber colors and perfect sympathy. They hugged me, whispered, "We'll take care of everything." And for a moment I believed them. But their visits slowly changed. They weren't about comfort anymore. Ryan would bring real estate brochures, sliding them across the table between coffee cups. "Mum, look at these retirement communities. You'd love the activities." Emma nodded along, smiling that polished smile of hers, the one that never quite reached her eyes. I didn't see their plan then. I just saw two young professionals trying to help a grieving widow. That's what love does, it blinds you with trust. I told myself they were thinking about my well-being, not the house Richard and I spent decades paying for. Now looking back, I see every sign I ignored. Every careful suggestion to downsize, every concerned tone that hid calculation. They saw me as old, tired, and replaceable. It's funny how age turns experience into invisibility in your own home. If you're reading this, and you've ever been made to feel like you're a burden, listen to me, you're not. You're the reason your family exists. Don't let anyone convince you that your time is over just because they're impatient to take your place. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of quiet morning where the smell of coffee still lingered in the air. I was sitting by the window trying to gather the courage to pack Richard's things when Emma and Ryan arrived unannounced. They didn't come with flowers or comfort. They came with suitcases and a folder. Emma looked confident, almost rehearsed. She sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where she once did her homework, and slid a stack of papers toward me. Her voice was smooth, businesslike. She said her father's will had been finalized, and that according to it, everything now belonged to her. The house, the savings, the investments, all of it. She said she'd been letting me stay here out of kindness, but that it was time for me to move out. I remember staring at her, waiting for the punchline, but it never came. My daughter wasn't joking when she said, "This house is mine now, Mum." Something inside me cracked. She called it her house, the same home I scrubbed, painted, and filled with memories for 43 years. I'd spent decades making sure it felt warm and safe for her, and now she was tossing me out of it like an unwanted tenant. Then she pulled out $200 from her purse and placed it on the counter the way you'd tip a server after dinner. "This should cover you for a few days while you figure things out," she said casually. Ryan didn't even meet my eyes. He just loaded my suitcases into their car, talking about how independence would be good for me. It's strange how fast your entire world can collapse. One moment you're someone's mother, the next you're a burden being moved out like furniture. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I quietly locked away my tears. I told myself that sometimes silence is the only dignity you have left when love is no longer returned. That day, as I watched the house disappear in the rearview mirror, I thought I was leaving everything behind. What I didn't know was that this was only the beginning of the truth and of a reckoning that would turn everything upside down. That night, I found myself standing under the flickering neon sign of a budget motel on the edge of town. The kind of place where the curtains don't quite close and the air smells faintly of disinfectant and despair. $49 a night bought me a thin mattress, 2 flat pillows, and the sound of strangers arguing through paper walls. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my suitcase. Everything I owned now fit inside it. I had raised a daughter, managed a household, cared for a husband through sickness, and somehow ended up here alone, counting the dollars my child tossed at me like spare change. For a while I just sat there, numb. But when the tears finally came, they weren't just from heartbreak. They were from confusion. Something about what Emma had said didn't add up. Richard, my late husband, had always been meticulous, almost obsessive when it came to paperwork. He never signed a document without reading every line. He kept copies of everything in a locked drawer, labeled and dated. He used to tell me, "In this family, clarity is protection. So why would he leave me with nothing?" It didn't make sense. The man who used to check the gas bill twice wasn't careless enough to disinherit his wife of 40 years. That thought stayed with me all night. I tried to sleep, but the hum of the old air conditioner sounded like a whisper, a reminder that something was terribly wrong. Maybe it was denial, maybe hope, but deep down I knew I had to find out the truth. By sunrise I had made up my mind. I dug through my purse, found the worn business card of Richard's lawyer, and stared at the name, Harold Finch. I remembered meeting him years ago when we bought our house. He had kind eyes and a calm voice, the kind of man you could still trust in a world that seemed to have forgotten what that meant. As the first light slipped through the blinds, I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, about knowing whether the life I built had been a lie. Sometimes the lowest place you fall isn't a motel room. It's the moment you realize you've been living someone else's version of your life. But I was done being a background character in my own story. That morning, with $50 left in my wallet and a heart full of questions, I decided to start searching for answers. The next morning, I took the first bus downtown, clutching my last few dollars, and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, Richard hadn't betrayed me after all. The ride was quiet except for the hum of the old engine and the low murmur of strangers who seemed to carry their own invisible burdens. I stared out the window, thinking about how one signature could erase a lifetime of love or restore it. When I arrived at Harold Finch's law office, my hands were trembling. I hadn't seen him in years, not since Richard and I finalized the paperwork for our house. The same house my daughter had just thrown me out of. The waiting room smelled of coffee and polished wood. Everything looked neat and calm, like the world inside those walls still made sense. When Harold saw me, his eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Linda, my dear, I was wondering when you'd come in. I tried calling you, but your daughter said you were traveling." Traveling? The word hit like a punch to the chest. Emma had lied to keep me away. I sat down and told him everything. The eviction, the so-called will, the money she claimed. He listened in silence, his expression shifting from concern to disbelief. Then he opened a thick folder from his drawer. "Your husband's will is very clear," he said quietly. As he read aloud, I could barely breathe. According to the official notarized document Richard had left our home, the same one I was kicked out of to me, along with 70% of his financial assets, over $23 million in total. Emma's name appeared farther down the page. Her portion was $10 million, but it came with a condition: the funds would be held in trust and released only if she treated me with respect and dignity after her father's death. Harold looked up. "Linda, your husband anticipated this. He made these changes 6 months before he passed. He said he was worried about Emma's attitude toward money and toward you." I sat there speechless. My own daughter had thrown me out of my house, forged a story, and handed me $200, while the truth sat here in black ink, waiting to be read. Harold's voice grew firm. "If what you're telling me is true, she's committed serious crimes, fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. We'll contact the authorities immediately." I could feel my pulse in my throat. Everything I'd lost was suddenly within reach again. But this wasn't about money anymore. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming my worth after being treated like I didn't matter. As I held that document in my hands, a strange calm settled over me. The woman who had left her home in tears was gone. In her place was someone ready to fight back. Emma thought she had played the perfect game. She had no idea her father had already written the rules, and I was about to win them all. Once the shock faded, something inside me hardened. Harold called it a legal process. I called it payback, slow, precise, and fair. The moment Harold confirmed the will's authenticity, he moved into action like a man who had done this 100 times. He picked up the phone and started making calls to the police, to the bank, to the estate office. His voice was calm, but commanding, the kind of tone that makes people listen without asking too many questions. By noon, the wheels of justice were already turning. Every account connected to Emma and her husband was flagged for investigation. The bank froze their access pending verification of ownership. Harold's assistant drafted formal reports for elder abuse and document fraud. It felt surreal watching my tragedy turn into a case file with my name on it. That evening, Harold insisted I stay in his office until everything was confirmed. He even made me tea, the kind that smelled faintly of mint and reassurance. "We'll have results soon," he promised. "Just wait." A few hours later, we did. At exactly 3:47 p.m., Harold's phone buzzed. It was the bank. Emma's transactions had been suspended. The utilities she transferred to her name were frozen. Even her credit cards, those platinum ones she loved to flash, had been declined while she was shopping downtown. I didn't need to imagine her reaction. I could see it in my mind like a movie scene: the confusion, the panic, the dawning realization that her perfect plan was crumbling. For the first time in weeks, I smiled, not out of revenge, but relief. When you've been treated like you're powerless, there's a quiet joy in watching justice start to move on your behalf. But Harold wasn't smiling. He was pacing, reviewing paperwork, cross-checking every document. "We're not done," he said. "People like your daughter don't fold easily. She'll try to talk her way out of this. You need to be ready." I nodded. The old me, the one who'd keep peace at any cost, was gone. This version of me had learned that silence only protects the wrong people. As the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Harold closed the folder, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "Linda," he said, "you've spent your life caring for everyone else. Let the law take care of you this time." And that's exactly what we did. Outside his office, the evening air felt different, lighter, sharper. Somewhere out there, Emma was realizing her father's fortune had never truly been hers. The same way she was about to learn that when you betray the one person who'd give you everything karma doesn't need. An invitation, it just shows up on schedule. The call came that afternoon while Harold and I were reviewing more documents. My phone lit up with Emma's name. For a moment I considered letting it ring out, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered. Her voice, usually polished and confident, now trembled. She said there had been some sort of mix-up with the banks. None of the cards were working and the accounts were frozen. She sounded confused, but underneath that confusion was panic. I could almost hear her world falling apart. "Mum, do you know what's going on?" she asked. I took a slow breath before replying. "I do. I'm at Harold Finch's office, your father's attorney. You remember him, don't you? The one who read the real will." There was silence on the other end. Not the casual kind, but the kind that presses down heavy when someone realizes they've been caught. Emma tried to recover her tone, shifting fast. She said I was misunderstanding everything, that she only wanted to protect me from stress from managing complicated finances. It was manipulation, pure and simple, the same old tactic dressed as concern. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Calm is sometimes the most powerful weapon. "Emma, I said your father's will included a very specific clause. You were to receive your share only if you treated me with dignity and respect. That condition no longer applies to you." For a few seconds she didn't speak. Then came the sharp inhale, the disbelief, the desperate attempt to twist the story back in her favor. She said I was confused, that grief was clouding my judgment, that someone must be taking advantage of me. It would have worked once. For years I let her control the narrative, make me question my own reality. But not this time. "Emma," I said quietly, "the only person who took advantage of me is the one on this call." Her voice cracked. She begged for a meeting, said we could fix this, keep it in the family. But the truth had already made its way into official hands. There was no fixing it anymore. When I hung up, Harold looked at me over his glasses. "You handled that well," he said. I nodded, though my hands were shaking. It wasn't triumph. I felt it was the strange ache that comes from realizing you've lost someone long before you ever admitted it to yourself. Still, a shift had happened. The balance of power that had tilted her way for so long had finally swung back. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel powerless. That night, I slept for the first time in weeks. Not because everything was solved, but because I finally understood something simple. Respect can't be inherited, it has to be earned. And my daughter had just learned that lesson the hardest way possible. The next morning, Harold called before sunrise. His tone was calm but firm, the kind of voice that tells you something irreversible is about to happen. The police had reviewed the evidence, the forged will, the forged signatures, the financial manipulation, and moved faster than anyone expected. Warrants had been issued. By evening, Emma was having dinner with her friends at a trendy restaurant downtown when the officers walked in. Witnesses later said she froze her fork mid-air as the detective placed a hand on her shoulder and quietly said her name. No shouting, no drama. Just the quiet precision of consequence arriving right on time. Ryan was arrested the next morning at his office. Apparently, his financial records tied him directly to the forgeries. The man who prided himself on numbers had finally been undone by his own math. When Harold called to tell me it was done, I didn't feel the rush of satisfaction people expect. What I felt was peace, the kind that comes after months of noise finally stop. I drove back to my house, and unlocked the door with keys that suddenly felt heavier than ever. The air inside was still. Emma's perfume lingered faintly in the hallway. I walked through each room slowly, taking in the chaos she'd left behind. Designer shoes, clothes piled on the bed, boxes labeled with names of contractors she'd already hired to remodel the place. It was as if she had been erasing me one paint sample at a time. In the master bedroom, the one Richard and I had shared for 40 years, I stood by the window and let the silence fill the space. For decades, that room had been his sanctuary, his space, his order. I realized that for most of my marriage, I had shaped my life around other people's comfort, his then Emma's. And now, for the first time, I was standing in a space that was finally mine. I opened the closet and began clearing her things. Every item went into garbage bags that I stacked neatly by the door. They weren't thrown out in anger. They were placed there with intention, a symbolic act of taking back what was always mine. She could collect them when she made bail. That night I slept in the master bed for the first time in years. The sheets smelled of lavender and memory. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the faint shadows of moonlight, and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. Justice doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it's as simple as turning a key in your own front door, breathing in your own air, and knowing finally that no one can take that away again. A few days after the arrests, I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't the police this time. Standing on my porch was a woman who looked like she had stepped straight out of a country club luncheon. Immaculate hair pearls, perfume that arrived before she did. Eleanor Collins, Ryan's mother. I had seen her only a few times before at family events, where she made polite conversation, but always looked like she was assessing the furniture. She greeted me with a thin smile that didn't touch her eyes. Linda, I think we should talk. I invited her in mostly out of curiosity. People like Eleanor don't show up without an agenda. She sat down in my living room as if it were still hers to command, crossing her legs with practiced elegance. This whole situation, she began, is unfortunate. Kevin and Emma. She paused, catching herself. Ryan and Emma have made mistakes, but surely we can resolve this without destroying multiple families. I said nothing. I wanted to see where she was going. She leaned forward. Kevin has a career, children, a reputation. A public trial would ruin him and your family too. I believe there's a way to end this quietly. My family is prepared to compensate you for the inconvenience. $5 million in exchange for dropping the charges against my son. I looked at her for a long moment, trying to decide if she was serious. She was. Her voice had the confidence of someone who'd never heard the word. 5 million, I repeated slowly, to forgive the man who helped steal 33 million from me. Eleanor smiled, patient, like she was explaining a concept to a child. Be realistic, Linda. Justice won't bring you peace. Money will. You could live comfortably, travel, start over. Why invite more pain? Her words hung in the air, dripping with entitlement. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. People like Eleanor believed problems could be solved with a checkbook and a signature. I stood up. Your son helped forge legal documents. He lied, he stole, and he threw me out of my own home. You think I'm going to sell my self-respect for your comfort? Her composure cracked just slightly. Linda, be careful. Some truths aren't meant to be unearthed. Your husband wasn't as innocent as you think. That got my attention. I turned to face her fully. What do you mean? She rose gracefully, brushing invisible dust from her sleeve. Let's just say Richard's business practices weren't always clean. It would be a shame if certain details became public. Trials can bring out unpleasant surprises. It was a threat, polished and polite, delivered like a line from a dinner party. Then she smiled, thanked me for the tea she never drank, and walked out as if she hadn't just tried to blackmail me. When the door closed, the house felt colder. I stood there, heart pounding, the echo of her words looping in my mind. Richard's business practices. What did she know Eleanor's visit wasn't about protecting her son? It was about leverage. And she had just handed me a new mystery, my husband's past. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the years, every moment that suddenly seemed suspicious. Those late-night phone calls, the unexplained trips, the secretive tone when finances came up. Maybe Eleanor was bluffing, or maybe she wasn't. Either way, she had opened a door I couldn't close. After Eleanor's visit, I couldn't shake her words. I replayed every syllable of that polished threat: your husband wasn't as innocent as you think. It echoed through the house long after she left. I told myself she was bluffing, grasping at anything to protect her son. But a small, uneasy voice whispered that she might not be. The next morning, I called Harold. He listened quietly as I recounted the conversation. When I mentioned Eleanor's warning, his tone changed. "Linda," he said, "if there's even a fraction of truth in what she said, we need clarity before this goes to trial. I'll bring in someone who can help." That's how I met Carol Nguyen, a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes. She was sharp, methodical, and spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen too many families torn apart by hidden money. She arrived at my house with a scanner, a camera, and a calmness that made me trust her instantly. We spent an entire day in Richard's old study. It was filled with his papers, neat folders, ledgers, contracts, all meticulously labeled just like I remembered. But as Carol went deeper, her expression shifted. What began as professional curiosity turned into something darker. She spread out several documents across the desk. "Linda, these transfers don't make sense," she said. "There are payments to shell companies that don't exist. Consulting fees to entities with no employees. These aren't normal transactions." I felt my stomach twist. "What are you saying?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Your husband was moving large sums of money through fake companies. This looks like money laundering." The room spun a little. "My husband, Richard, the man who balanced our checkbook down to the cent laundering money." It sounded impossible. But the evidence sat right in front of me, neat as a ledger line. Carol continued, her voice steady. "If this is confirmed, every dollar tied to these accounts is considered criminal proceeds. That includes the $33 million you just inherited. If the authorities uncover this, they can seize everything." Her words hit like cold water. I stared at the numbers, the signatures, the dates. Everything lined up. The inheritance I had fought so hard to reclaim was built on a foundation of lies. "How long?" I finally asked. "Based on these records, at least 10 years, maybe longer." I sank into Richard's chair, the leather creaking beneath me. My hands trembled as I picked up a familiar file, one labeled Harper Consulting Client Accounts. I'd walked past this folder for years without a second thought, assuming it was just another work project. The betrayal felt different this time. It wasn't loud or shocking like Emma's. It was quiet, buried under decades of trust. Carol reached across the desk. "Linda, I know this is hard, but you need to be prepared. If this information gets out, Emma and Ryan's lawyers could use it. They might even offer it to the FBI in exchange for reduced charges." The irony was unbearable. My daughter had stolen from me, and now she could use my husband's crimes to save herself. That night, I sat alone in the dark study, surrounded by papers that told a story I was never meant to read. For 40 years, I had believed I knew the man I shared a bed with. But the truth was sitting in front of me in numbers, signatures, and offshore accounts. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hands were shaking too hard to drink it. In that moment, I understood something painful and profound. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it destroys the version of your life you thought was real. And yet deep down, I also knew this wasn't the end. I had survived betrayal once. I could do it again. This time, though, I wouldn't just be fighting for money or reputation. I'd be fighting for the truth itself, no matter how dark it turned out to be. It started with a phone call I wasn't expecting. I was still processing what Carol had discovered about Richard's secret accounts when my phone lit up with Emma's name again. I should have ignored it. I wish I had. But curiosity, and that stubborn motherly instinct, the one that never dies, even after betrayal, made me answer. Her voice was quieter this time, almost fragile. "Mum, we need to meet. There are things about Dad you don't understand. Things that could change everything." I already knew what she was referring to. "I know about the money, Emma," I said softly. The silence that followed was confirmation enough. She recovered quickly. "Then you know what we're dealing with. Kevin's lawyers are talking to the FBI. They're willing to negotiate. Everyone could walk away from this without more damage." Negotiate what exactly, I asked, though I already had an idea. Emma explained the deal. If I agreed to cooperate, I could keep the house and $5 million, what she called clean assets. In return, she and Ryan would get immunity. Their charges would disappear. My cooperation, she said, would protect the family. I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Protect the family," I repeated. "You mean protect yourselves." She insisted I was being emotional, that I didn't understand how dangerous the situation could become. She said the FBI could seize everything, that it was smarter to accept what we could salvage. The word she used, salvage, stuck in my mind. My life, my marriage, my dignity, all reduced to something she wanted to salvage. As she spoke, I could hear Ryan coaching her in the background. His tone was sharp, controlled, like a man negotiating a business merger. They weren't just trying to make peace. They were trying to manipulate me one last time. "Emma," I said quietly, "you're asking me to trade truth for comfort, to help you benefit from your crimes by using your father's." She didn't deny it. Instead, she sighed like a tired child. "I'm asking you to be practical. We can't win this by fighting. Let's end it before everything is gone." I could feel my chest tighten. Part of me wanted to hang up. Another part wanted to scream. But instead, I listened to the tone, the rehearsed calm, the coldness in her voice that no longer sounded like my daughter's. When the call ended, I sat in Richard's study, surrounded by the evidence of every lie we'd lived through. The room smelled like old paper and guilt. The offer she'd made was tempting in a cruel way, 5 million and peace if I just stayed quiet. But peace built on silence isn't peace at all. It's surrender. I looked at Richard's photo on the desk. For years I thought his secrets died with him. Now I realized they were still alive, infecting everything he'd left behind. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about all the other people, mothers, widows, families who've been pushed into corners like this, asked to compromise for the sake of moving on. It's never about moving on, it's about giving in. By morning, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to hide, and I wasn't going to let them rewrite the story again. The truth had already cost me too much to be buried under another lie. I picked up the phone and called Carol. "Can you get me a meeting with the FBI?" I asked. Her reply was calm but certain. "If you're ready to tell them everything, I can make that happen today." Ready, maybe not. But I was done being afraid. That day, I decided I would rather lose everything honestly than keep anything through silence. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was finally standing on solid ground. The following morning, I sat in a quiet government office, staring at a woman who radiated calm authority. Her badge read Agent Sarah Martinez, and the look in her eyes told me she had seen every kind of lie people could tell. She listened as I recounted everything from the forged will to the deal Emma and Ryan tried to force on me. When I finished, she closed her notebook and said, "Mrs. Harper, what your daughter and her husband are attempting isn't negotiation. It's extortion." Her voice was steady, deliberate. "If you're willing to cooperate, we can catch them in the act. But it would mean wearing a recording device during your next meeting." For a moment, I hesitated. The idea of being wired of sitting across from my own daughter while recording her crimes felt surreal. Then I remembered the night she threw me out of my house, the sting of those words, "Find somewhere else to die." The hesitation vanished. "I'll do it," I said. 3 hours later, I was sitting in my living room with a small device taped under my blouse. The room looked almost peaceful, sunlight spilling across the floor, the scent of coffee lingering, but I could feel the tension humming in my chest. At exactly 8 o'clock, there was a knock. Emma and Ryan walked in as if nothing had ever happened. Emma smiled, polished and pleasant, and kissed my cheek. Ryan carried a sleek briefcase, the kind that probably held the documents outlining my supposed salvation. "Mom, you look wonderful," Emma said. "I'm glad we can finally resolve this." I gestured for them to sit. Ryan opened the briefcase, sliding papers across the table. "Our lawyers have structured everything fairly. You keep the house and 5 million in verified assets. In return, we all move forward. No one needs to suffer more than necessary." His tone was professional, detached, like this was just another business transaction. I studied their faces. The calm, rehearsed expressions, the subtle glances between them, and felt an almost physical ache. These were my family, but they looked like strangers closing a deal. I leaned back. "That's interesting," I said softly. "But tell me something, Ryan. When did you first learn about Richard's money laundering? Before or after you helped forge his will?" The colour drained from his face. Emma's smile faltered. "Mum, that's not relevant," she stammered. "Oh, it's very relevant," I said, "because Agent Martinez found it quite fascinating." The room went still. "Agent who?" Ryan asked, his voice suddenly sharp. That's when the door burst open. Agents moved in swiftly, calm but firm. Emma gasped. Ryan tried to stand, but one of the officers restrained him, confiscating the briefcase and their phones. Emma Harper and Ryan Collins. Agent Martinez said, stepping forward, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and attempted extortion of a federal witness." Emma turned to me, eyes wide with disbelief. "Mum, how could you do this to your own family?" I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "The same way you could forge your father's will and steal my home. The difference is what I did was legal." As they were led out, the silence that followed was heavy, but strangely peaceful. I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath the entire time. Agent Martinez turned to me. "You did well, Mrs. Harper. But you should know Ryan's warning wasn't entirely empty. Your husband had connections with dangerous people. We'll need to brief you on what comes next." Dangerous people. Of course, there had to be another twist. But for that moment, standing in my own living room, surrounded by sunlight and the soft hum of justice finally catching up, I didn't feel fear. I felt closure. It had taken betrayal, loss, and a wire taped to my chest. But I had finally taken my power back. And for the first time in months, I believed something I hadn't dared to before. I wasn't just surviving this story. I was rewriting it. After Emma and Ryan were taken away, I sat in silence trying to process what had just happened. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a kind of hollow calm. My home felt unfamiliar, even though I had fought so hard to reclaim it. I should have felt triumphant, but the truth was, I was exhausted. Agent Sarah Martinez returned later that afternoon. She carried a thick folder under her arm, her expression focused but strangely gentle. "Mrs. Harper," she began, "there's something you need to know about your husband. Something that changes everything." My pulse quickened. I'd already uncovered one devastating truth about Richard. I wasn't sure I could take another. She opened the folder, revealing documents stamped confidential. "Your husband wasn't just laundering money," she said. "He was working with us." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "Working with you?" Agent Martinez nodded. For 12 years, Richard Harper acted as a confidential informant for the FBI. He infiltrated several organized crime networks under the guise of a financial consultant. The money transfers. You saw the shell companies, the fake transactions. They were part of a long-term undercover operation to expose a major mafia syndicate. It felt like the air was pulled from the room. For months I'd been drowning in shame and confusion and believing my husband was corrupt. Now I was being told he was the opposite, an undercover hero in a story I never knew existed. She continued, "The accounts you thought were illegal were monitored by our financial crimes unit. The money he received wasn't dirty. It was compensation for his cooperation and to maintain his cover. Every dollar of that $33 million is legitimate. The FBI verified it." I pressed a hand to my mouth, overwhelmed. Richard, my Richard Wyard, had been living a double life to protect others, to protect me. The man I'd accused in my heart of deceit had actually been risking everything for justice. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked softly. "The operation was classified," Martinez explained. "Even local field officers didn't have full access. Your husband's death came before the case concluded, and we couldn't contact you until the investigation was fully closed. Ironically, your daughter's crimes brought this to light." I laughed quietly, not out of humor but disbelief. The same daughter who tried to destroy me had accidentally restored my husband's name. Martinez leaned forward. "Your inheritance is safe, Mrs. Harper. The funds, the property, the estate, it's all clean. And beyond that, your husband's work helped the FBI arrest 47 individuals involved in money laundering, racketeering, and organized crime. His information led to the seizure of over $200 million in assets." Tears stung my eyes. For the first time in months, they weren't born of grief, but of pride. I looked out the window, the evening light spilling across the yard Richard had tended with such care. Suddenly everything looked different. The house wasn't tainted anymore. It was proof of what he'd fought for. Agent Martinez smiled faintly. "You asked me once if fear was your primary emotion. I don't think it is anymore. What I see now is someone who refused to be silenced, who honored the truth even when it hurt." When she left, I sat alone for a long while, letting the quiet settle. The truth had come full circle. My husband's honor was restored, my daughter's deceit exposed. And for the first time, I understood that survival isn't about fighting everyone. It's about standing firm when the world tries to twist your story. That night, I walked through the house and stopped in Richard's study. I ran my fingers over the desk where his files had once sat and whispered, "You were playing a bigger game than I ever realized." And then for the first time since this all began, I smiled. The story that began with betrayal had ended in redemption. The money was real, the justice was real, and my peace finally was real too. 6 months passed, and the world around me finally began to quiet down. The trial had ended. The endless interviews, court dates, and paperwork were behind me. Emma and Ryan had each been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. Shorter than I expected, but long enough for reflection. Long enough, I hoped, for them to understand the weight of what they'd done. The headlines faded, but their story and mine still lingered. Reporters had called it the Harper case, a family torn by greed. What they didn't realize was that beneath the scandal was something deeper. It wasn't just about money, it was about reclaiming dignity. My home, once filled with ghosts of betrayal, now felt alive again. The walls didn't echo with anger anymore. They carried laughter music and the scent of coffee brewing every morning. I'd renovated the place not to erase the past, but to rebuild around it. Richard's old study had become my art studio. The heavy oak desk was replaced by easels and bright paint. I spent mornings painting sunlight, something I once thought I'd never feel again. It became therapy in motion, each brushstroke a quiet victory over everything that tried to break me. But healing wasn't just about me. I couldn't stop thinking about other seniors like me, people quietly suffering from manipulation, deceit, or abandonment by their own families. So with part of the money Richard had left me, I started the Harper Foundation for Elder Protection. We began small funding legal aid for older adults facing financial exploitation. Then we grew partnering with advocacy groups, pushing for stronger elder protection laws, helping victims tell their stories. It felt right. It felt purposeful. Like every painful chapter had been leading me here. Then came the phone call from a producer at a streaming network. They wanted to adapt my story into a documentary. Not sensationalized drama, but a story of courage, betrayal, and justice. At first I hesitated. The thought of exposing everything, my pain, my mistakes, my family, felt raw. But the producer said something that stuck with me. "Your story isn't about revenge, Linda. It's about resilience. People need to hear that." He was right. I agreed with one condition, that the proceeds go directly to the foundation. If my story could help even one person find their voice, then maybe it was worth revisiting the past. The documentary was titled The Mother's Revenge, An American Story of Justice. When it premiered, messages flooded in from around the country. Strangers, seniors, caregivers, even adult children wrote to say how it changed their perspective on family aging and self-worth. One letter stood out. It was from a woman in Ohio. She wrote, "I thought I was powerless when my son took over my finances. Then I saw your story. I called a lawyer the next morning. That's when I realized this wasn't just my victory. It was a spark that could ignite something larger. Now every morning I walk through my house, the same one my daughter once claimed as hers, and feel a peace I never knew before. Not because I won, but because I refused to give up." Sometimes I still get letters from Emma. I read the first few. They were full of excuses, apologies, and regret. Then I stopped opening them. Forgiveness is complicated. It doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means letting go of the need to fix what others broke. The world had taken almost everything from me, once my trust, my home, my peace. But in losing it all, I found something stronger, myself. When people ask what I learned from all of it, I tell them this. It's never too late to stand up for yourself, and it's never too late to rewrite the story others tried to write for you. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about reclaiming your voice. And as I stood in my art studio, sunlight spilling over a painting of a woman standing tall beneath a clear sky, I realized she wasn't just a painting anymore. She was me. It's been over a year since the trial ended, and life has settled into a rhythm that feels both peaceful and earned. The house that once echoed with betrayal now hums with quiet purpose. My days start with coffee on the porch and end in my art studio, painting the kind of sunlight that once felt out of reach. Every now and then a letter arrives. The handwriting is familiar, graceful, and hesitant Emma's. The first few came from the federal prison in Illinois. They were long, emotional, full of apologies and explanations. She wrote about sleepless nights, guilt, and the weight of realizing what she'd done. She said she'd been blind, desperate, manipulated. She said she missed me. I read the first 3. Then I stopped. People often ask me if I've forgiven her. It's a question I've learned to answer carefully. Forgiveness is a word that sounds noble, but it's heavier than people admit. It's not a switch you flip. It's a long, quiet reckoning between what you've lost and what you're willing to let go. I don't hate my daughter, but I also don't owe her my peace. That's something many people don't understand about family. Blood doesn't automatically make someone loyal. Being a mother doesn't mean you have to keep bleeding for those who hurt you. Sometimes love means stepping back, refusing to enable choosing self-respect over reconciliation that's only built on guilt. Emma's last letter said she wanted to rebuild our relationship, that she was attending therapy, volunteering with elderly inmates, trying to become someone I could be proud of again. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I needed space to live a life that wasn't defined by what she did to me. I've come to believe that forgiveness doesn't always require contact. You can forgive someone privately in your own heart and still decide they no longer belong in your life. That's not cruelty. That's healing. Some evenings when I walk through my studio, I stop at a painting I finished last month. It's a portrait of a woman standing at the edge of an open field, wind in her hair, face turned toward the horizon. She looks free, not because everything is perfect, but because she finally stopped trying to fix what was broken beyond repair. That woman is me. I've learned that closure doesn't come from apologies. It comes from reclaiming your story and refusing to let pain dictate the rest of it. Emma has her path now, and I have mine. Maybe one day those paths will cross again. Maybe they won't. Either way, I've made peace with it. Because at the end of it all, peace isn't found in reconciliation. It's found in release. And sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is stop chasing forgiveness and start choosing freedom. When I look back now, it almost feels like a different lifetime. The woman I used to be, quiet, compliant, afraid to make waves, doesn't exist anymore. What began as heartbreak turned into something larger than I ever imagined. My story started with betrayal, but it ended with clarity. And maybe that's the real victory. The Harper Foundation has grown faster than I ever dreamed. Every week I get letters, emails, and calls from seniors who were tricked out of their homes. Parents abandoned by children, they sacrificed everything for widows, manipulated into signing papers they didn't understand. Their stories break my heart. But they also remind me why I can't stay silent. Because the truth is, elder abuse doesn't always look like bruises or neglect. Sometimes it looks like fake concern and carefully worded manipulation. It hides behind smiles and the phrase, "we're just trying to help." And the people it hurts most are often the ones too kind, too trusting, or too tired to fight back. If my journey taught me anything, it's that it's never too late to reclaim your voice. You don't have to accept disrespect just because it comes from family. You don't have to stay quiet just because you're older. You have power. Real, legal, emotional power to stand up, speak out, and say, enough. So to anyone watching this, if you've ever felt invisible, used, or left behind, know this: your story matters. Share it. Speak it. Because silence is how abuse survives. Awareness is how it ends. And if you're someone who's never experienced it, but knows an older neighbor, a widowed friend, or even a parent who seems isolated, check in on them. Sometimes one conversation can change everything. My hope isn't just that you found strength in my story, but that you find courage in your own. Tell it. Let others hear it. Because every time someone speaks up, we make it harder for cruelty to hide behind the word family. I rebuilt my life not by erasing the pain, but by transforming it into purpose. And if I can do it, so can you. If my story touched you, I invite you to subscribe, share your experience in the comments, and tell the world where you're watching from. Let's build a space where no parent, no grandparent, and no elder ever feels forgotten again. Because healing doesn't start when the pain ends. It starts when someone finally says, "You're not alone." And I'm here to tell you, you never were.